Welcome back to Hannah's Harvest. Paisley and I are out in the garden today, and I wanted to talk about something that was really confusing for me as a beginning gardener. When I first started out growing vegetables and fruits at home, it was really frustrating to find that common vegetables that I thought were grown during the summer struggled in the heat. So when I first grew things like tomatoes, squash, cucumbers, I was really confused because those to me had always been summer fruits, but they really struggled when the temperatures got hot. And it's taken me a couple years to learn the fruits and vegetables that actually do well in the hot and humid months of July and August here in Arkansas. So I wanted to share with you today some vegetables that do really well in high heat and high humidity and those that struggle, and some tips if you're wanting to grow things that don't love the heat but you have a hot climate. Let's start with something that loves the heat and flourishes in hot and humid temperatures. This is called blue spice basil, and every type of basil that I've grown has been really successful in the heat. They do well in cooler temperatures, but they really thrive and grow the biggest in the heat of the summer. Another plant that loves high heat and high humidity is okra. Okra is a plant that produces like crazy, and the more humid and more hot your climate is, the more successful it will be. In fact, it doesn't do well in temperatures below 60 degrees, but once you get up into the 80s and even the 90s, it starts to really thrive. This is my first year growing sweet potatoes, and I'm really excited with how they're doing so far. I've been amazed at how fast they've grown, especially when the heat and humidity has really increased in July and August. Check it out. I already have some sweet potato tubers forming, and I'm really excited to harvest them in the next couple months. Zinnias also do really well in high heat and high humidity. They produce really well at the beginning of the season, and they go strong all season long. One thing to watch out for though, if you have a really humid climate, is funguses and disease like these spots on my zinnias. If I see these on the leaves, I just pick them off. And this tends to happen at the very end of the summer, and especially after lots of rain. Another thing that does especially well in hot and humid temperatures are peppers, and especially hot peppers like these. They love when temperatures get hot, and they continue to produce through temperatures in the high 80s and even in the 90s. A couple plants that struggle in hot and humid climates. The first one is cucumbers. And you can see the top of the plant looks good, but the further we go down, the more sad and diseased and damaged it looks. Cucumbers need to be watered in the heat of the summer, at least for me, twice a day to stay happy and healthy. And it's really normal for them to start to look sad when the temperatures get up in the 90s. I've also found that squash really struggles when temps get up in the 90s. And to combat that, I've actually planted these squash underneath some basil and some zinnias to get a little bit of shade. I'm hoping that that helps it produce in the heat of the summer, and then as soon as it starts to cool down, I'll trim back the plants around it to give it more sunlight. Tomatoes are actually another vegetable that really struggles in heat. Once the temperatures get up in the 90s, they stop flowering, so they put a hold on producing fruit, and they just kind of go into survival mode. When the temperatures get back down into the 80s, they'll start producing again, but when the temperatures are hot and humid, it's really normal to see a lot of yellowing, browning, and even spots on your tomatoes. And I've also seen a lot of people have had a hard time with their tomatoes ripening in really hot temperatures. So ideal temps for tomatoes are in the high 80s and below. Well, a couple things that have helped me when I'm trying to grow these plants that don't do great in temperatures in the high 90s. I like to plant my cucumbers, squash, and tomatoes as early as possible in the spring. As soon as the temperatures get up in the 50s, I like to plant these plants, and that way they get established and have a strong root system before the temperatures really get hot. Another thing that really helps them stay healthy and thriving is watering. And in the heat of the summer, I watch my plants carefully, and things like cucumbers, I water twice a day to keep them happy. I also make sure that I'm fertilizing on a monthly schedule. That's what the fertilizer I use recommends, to make sure that they have the nutrients they need to thrive. Another thing you might do is wait to plant these things or plant another round of these things in August, especially things like cucumbers and crops that are pretty quick from seed to harvest. You might have time in your growing season if you plant them in August. By the time they're up and growing, if the temperatures are getting cooler, you might have better success. I also work hard to find seeds that are grown especially in hot and humid places, especially for things like tomatoes and cucumbers and squash. If they don't say that they like high humidity or that they're disease and mildew resistant, I normally don't grow them because I have the best success with varieties that are bred for my climate. Things that don't like the heat typically don't do well here in Arkansas. So when you're checking out your seed packets, make sure you look for varieties that are made to grow in your area or in your growing conditions. So don't give up on your garden when temperatures get hot and your garden looks tired. There are still several things that can thrive in the heat, but you might just have to be more intentional about when you plan your plantings. So remember, things like tomatoes, squash, and cucumber, plant early or do a second round at the beginning of fall. And then things like okra, sweet potatoes, basil, and several flowers like zinnias and sunflowers can be planted early spring and then go all season long. You can even plant those varieties in the middle of the summer for a second harvest. Well, I hope these tips are helpful, and as always, thank you so much for watching.